Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain and logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program Josh Hunt, who's Development Manager at BluJay Solutions. And today we're going to talk about forming a partnership with your software as a service provider. Now, sending out a request for proposal or RFP is what most companies do when they're looking for a technology solution. But what if instead of a request for a proposal, you sent out a request for partnership? As my friend Kate Vitasic from the University of Tennessee suggested, some years ago. It seems like companies are starting to move in that direction, where instead of looking for a vendor of technology solutions, they're actually looking for a partner, someone that they're going to be able to work with and help them achieve their objectives. But what factors are driving this change? How do you go about establishing a strong, partnership with a technology provider? And, how does the software as a service model, for example, how does that align with this move toward creating partnerships? Well, that's some of the questions we're going to address in today's episode. And it's great to have Josh on the program, to share his insights and perspective on this topic. So, Josh, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks, Adrian. I'm glad to be here. This is a topic that I've been very passionate over my career and really seen the values in developing a partnership with a customer.
Great. Yeah, and it's something that I've been seeing more and more of. In fact, over the past couple of years, I've been hearing companies talk, more about, finding the right software partner, right, instead of a vendor. So in other words, when selecting a solution, it's not just about, features and functions. It's also about how well can we work with this, provider, to help us achieve our goals moving forward. Do you see this trend happening too? And kind of from your perspective, what's driving it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we see it in our engagements with customers for sure. If I speak, when I spoke about this topic at Gartner earlier this year, I had probably more so than ever, folks coming up afterwards to me and saying, hey, we're engaging with someone here, and I'm interested in how we embark on a partnership, an engagement, a different type of relationship. Whether they had coined that a partnership or not, but how do we engage in that? I think it comes from somewhat from a practical sense of some of these folks and customers have been around the block once on this sort of on a SaaS provider. We're, here we're 20 years into this, in a SaaS model. And there have been some people that have been around the block once and said, and learned from that and said, the next time around, I think we need to really focus on that relationship part of getting a software provider. I think that's one part of it. I think that it's sort of an evolution of products as well as you see across lots of products. Like it starts to level out, right, feature function wise, as you mentioned. That it starts to be going. If you look at like TMS, for example, feature function wise, you kind of have a lot of expectations of what those softwares do today, and there's a bar set there. And I think people are looking beyond that bar now to like, where can I get value? Our customers are looking at where I can get value, and we're looking at as providers, how do we provide value above just, digitizing routing guides and rates and things like that. Some of these software, right, we're down, not just first level of feature functions, but third and fourth and fifth layers of this functionality. It's in there. And now how do we provide value up at this partnership level in a long term to stay engaged with our customers in the long term?
Yeah, no, a lot of great points. I know when I've had conversations with companies around this point, one of the things that they've brought up with me is the fact that, hey, we know we've got our immediate needs, right? Whether it's a TMS or WMS, whatever application they're looking for, we've got our immediate needs and we need some functionality to address those needs. But we know, particularly in this market environment, that, a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, we're going to have a completely set of different needs that perhaps it's going to be, there's going to require some additional innovation on the product, on the part of the solution, or we're going to need help with, trying to get the most out of the solution and trying to figure out how we can leverage a tool to maximize its value, so on and so forth. So they're saying, we really need to be working with someone more from a long-term perspective that's going to, as our needs change, is going to be able to, line up with us and be able to support us, in this more dynamic fashion. So that's what I'm hearing. Do you hear some of that as well?
Yeah, and I think as you see, if I go along with that, some of the trends right there with convergence. We talked several years ago. We were talking about transportation convergence and bringing sort of all modes together on a platform, and then really to supply chain convergence. And everybody knew there were places that they needed to grow to, and that they're going to be pushed to grow into. And they looked for a partner to say, who can sort of grow with me, and sort of is almost be an organism, right? That can grow and react to the environment and do software functional enhancements to bring that on, provide the network, that's there to maximize the value. So yeah, I think that's a very good point. And they want someone that can grow with them because they know things are changing out there. And now I need to establish this relationship now.
Right. Now you brought up, the kind of the software as a service, model. So I mean, relative to, the traditional kind of in-house deployment approach that was certainly much more common, years and years ago. I mean, how does SaaS, help or facilitate this partnership approach?
Yeah, I think it's right in the name somewhat, software as a service. And we're looking at a service that we provide. I mean, it's subscription based in most parts, right? I mean, you pay a monthly invoice. That's something, I'm putting my invoice in front of you every month for the service that I'm providing you. And this is something that you can choose to not go with anymore. So I think the SaaS providers are on the hook to provide that value month over month and year over year, where we have to sit in front of our customers and say, how are you providing me value for what I'm giving you? And I think that the SaaS model there plays a big role in having that active relationship and showing the value day over day.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because I mean, I think that before, historically, it was almost like kind of a leap of faith, right? In the old days, right, where you would put in all this capital, you might spend $1 million on a license fee and then another $1 million or $2 million, to deploy. And then, then you kick things off. And by that point, you've already spent $3 million. You're not really knowing whether, you're actually going to get the value from this, or, what kind of, relationship this is, going to be. Where I think, with this model, certainly over the years, it's kind of been proven out, you kind of lower that, certainly the financial risk, but also the success risk, right? Because I think, if for some reason things are not going well, and it's not obviously, that simple, it's just, you pull the plug.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I think you to your point, I mean, you are paying those invoices monthly, over time, and you do have to kind of prove your value every month, if you will, and show that value every month, to ultimately get the renewal, right? If they're going to want to continue to work with you.
Yeah, and I think it does drive, as a natural sort of extension of that, is to start to more talk about long-term goals with a partner. This is something I think is really key to this type of relationship, is talking openly about your long-term goals, sharing your initiatives, whether they're strictly in transportation or in supply chain in general, that the strain and the stresses that you're under. Understanding those as on a long-term basis, or your years out, so that you can gain some alignment across the product and the customer.
I was going to hit on that a little bit with my next question, which is going to be, what's required to establish kind of a strong and effective partnership? Obviously, when you talk about partnership, you should be going into it with a long-term, perspective. I mean, how does the process begin, or how do you know that you're, setting a good foundation for a partnership?
Yeah, and it starts with the first engagement, right? And I think that starts in the sales cycle when you're reaching out to a customer and understanding. For me, that partnership comes by not so much, selling a product, but talking to a customer about their issues and what they're confronted with, and really getting in and understanding that. I mean, going to the level of, can I sit and watch some of your folks work? Can I see what they're doing every day? I mean, we've got some examples of where we've done that with different initiatives, and understand what your day-to-day stressors are, what your day-to-day, pains are there. And then it moves from a sales cycle into, you have a contract signed, and then you embark, the rubber hits the road sort of with the implementation, right? And where it becomes important to identify the right roles and responsibilities on that team, build trust. And I think this is really where a partnership is cemented, is in an implementation. This is, in our case, we're looking at like a 3 to 4 month engagement, high level of engagement there. And you're gaining trust amongst those teams. And it's something where if something sort of maybe bad happens during that implementation to the partnership, takes a while to heal. So those are, and if good things happen, they do the opposite, And so it's really the time during an implementation to cement that partnership and show that you have that type of, content there to really drive a partnership. And then you move really into what we were talking about a little bit before, is the long-term engagements, the top-to-top stuff, the understanding the initiatives and where your customer is going to alter your roadmap possibly, to say, hey, you guys are looking at this. We're also seeing that in the marketplace, and maybe that's worth altering our roadmap to line up with you, or vice versa. A customer saying, hey, our provider, our partner has this on their roadmap. This was an initiative we had out. Maybe do we change up that timeline a little bit and align with them, because there's value in us being, out there first and maybe a beta customer and ensuring you're getting the value out of those things. So I think it starts at that sales cycle, understanding issues, cementing it during the implementation with the right people, and building the trust and delivering on the go live, and sharing those initiatives and goals and objectives of the customer over the long term, and as well as the provider sharing, a product roadmap, for instance, on a regular basis, and being very transparent with that.
All great points. I mean, going back to kind of the begins with the sales process, I know I was, at an event, it was probably a year or so ago, and it was kind of a customer that was talking about kind of their TMS evaluation process. And, it took them over a year to select, their partner. And so part of me initially was saying, gosh, a year, it shouldn't take that long to, you're kind of leaving money on the table by just like delaying that process so long. But then once they told their story, I really understood what they were getting at, because they said, once we got, they went the traditional route of sending out the RFP, but then when they started having, to your point, these conversations with the different vendors, and then there was one in particular that, that was asking them the right questions, that were challenging them in some cases, was telling them things that maybe they hadn't thought about. And then as they were thinking about their long-term goals, and then they were looking at, well, how effectively do we communicate with one another? How well are we working together just in this whole process of just trying to figure out who to work with? And there was kind of those people things and those communication aspects that really helped to tilt the scales, because they said at the end of the day, when they got to their short list, and I think you mentioned this earlier, there was decent parity from a purely feature function standpoint. Yeah, one vendor might have been stronger in this area, another vendor might have been stronger in that other area. But really what tilted the scales was, hey, we felt like we could work with this provider through the implementation phase, and that if there were any bumps in the road, we would get through it together. And then I think even more importantly is, as our business continues to evolve and as our needs continue to change, we felt comfortable that we can have good ongoing communication and trust with one another to make sure that where we are heading is aligned with where, they want to go and where they're heading as well. And I thought that was, then I can understand why it took them a year to select them, because it wasn't, they really gave some thought to it.
Yeah, no, I think you really hit on something there, Adrian, is the challenging part of that, like challenging the customer with things. I mean, the more and more I think about these partnerships, is they're not that different to friendships, that you have in real life. That's a two-way street, right? You challenge people, you have open and honest conversations about things. And I think it's a good point, the challenging part, even up in the sales process, where you might not think like, hey, yeah, we can do that. We can do that. I think it shows expertise, and it shows a willing to engage and get down into the details and the nitty gritty of the issues to challenge folks. And, how do you do that? Why do you do that? So I think that's a good point. The challenge part is important.
Right. And I think that's what the companies are always looking for, because they may go in with their own set of biases, or their, blinders on, or they think they know what they want, but sometimes they don't know what they want. And I think what impresses a lot of companies is when, someone comes in with a set of different perspective and is asking some really good, insightful questions that gets them to think, to say, oh, well, we hadn't thought about that, or we don't know why we want to do it this way, or we just thought that was the way you had to do it, type of thing.
Adrian, if I could inject something there, if you go back to, we talked about roles and responsibilities, I think that's one role of a project sponsor, is to sort of cultivate that attitude about it and say, let's be open to change here. Let's not, automate the old, and let's be open to change. And I think that's a real responsibility of a project sponsor, to drive this partnership and cultivate the attitude that you're talking about there.
No, that's a great point. Rather than being, completely prescriptive in terms of what you want, is going in with an open mind to kind of, get as much insights and ideas around innovation as possible. Going back to kind of the software as a service, I mean, I know traditionally one of the concerns as with SaaS has been, getting the features and functions that you need or want, in a timely manner. If you're kind of using a single instance, multi, tenant solution, I mean, how is this concern addressed by, taking a partnership approach?
Yeah, I mean, if you think of a true SaaS, like multi-tenant system where you've got, one version of software and everyone is logging on to that one version of software, it's like, yeah, if you have a sort of installed model, you're either maybe taking that in-house and you have your own development team and they're developing features and functions that are maybe very specific to your business. And how do you do that in a SaaS environment? How do you get on that product roadmap? I think it comes down to one thing. I think it is sharing that product roadmap and understanding that, talking about your issues, your goals, your initiatives. And then it comes down to really, I think, if you talk about the software development lifecycle itself within SaaS, if we see the adoption of Agile, Scrum development, and at the core of those types of Agile methodologies, whether it be Scrum or whatever it is stakeholder feedback. And so, here we run a 2-week sprint. So we're developing software, we're working with the customer to understand issues, and in 2 weeks later, we're coming back to them to see, how do you feel about what we just developed in the last 2 weeks? So one thing is, we can't go wrong for too long, and we're getting that feedback and we're engaging with that customer. And it's amazing that I see when a customer can, hey, I need this by this time. And when you start engaging them up front early in the development cycle, and they feel like, and they do have a voice in that, and you make them feel like they have a voice to change that or tweak that piece of software as it goes along, is just a complete change in how software is done. I mean, Agile talked a lot about how to make teams more efficient and things like that, but the stakeholder involvement from the customer side of things, I think, is overlooked a little bit, and how that customer engages with those things. So whether or not your provider is an Agile shop or however they develop, I urge customers to say, how can I be a part of this development? How can I see what you're building along the way, from the beginning when it's sketches on a whiteboard or sketches on paper? I mean, literally, talking about workflows and stuff, to let me see a page, let me see the buttons, let me see what I'm clicking, and the type of feedback, the whole atmosphere of that feedback changes when you put something in front of somebody that they can look at and touch and feel. It is really a fun environment to be in and develop software in.
That's a great point. I mean, it goes back to this kind of the agile development, as you talked about, and Scrum and getting the customer involved. I mean, it really does, if you're doing it right, it does get the customer involved and engaged, and it's such a much more continuous and rapid cycle, right, that you're operating in. I mean, I remember going back, 15, 20 years ago, and one of the things I would always hear from companies was, well, our vendor has a portal that you submit your request, and then it goes into it goes into the ether, and then they kind of rank it somehow, and then they kind of come back and say, well, your requested feature made the cut, or it didn't get the cut, or it's going to be in version, it's going to be in the mid-year version, or it's going to be in next year's version. So it's like, well, I can't wait 6 months or a year, and then there's always the thing, well, I'm a smaller company, so I'm never going to get the priority that a bigger company is going to have. So those are the challenges with the traditional model, right? So I think you always had that challenge there. And then, of course, if you ended up customizing your own thing, that created challenges with upgrades and integration. So I think, there's no perfect solution, but I think with the SaaS model, to your point, I think if you do it right, and if you're implementing this type of newer development scheme, and it almost serves as an excuse and a vehicle to have those ongoing conversations with the client,
Absolutely.
get those ongoing feedback, right?
Yeah, it is. It's a requirement. We look at our members on our team. We have our product owners within an agile team, and it's their job description, right? To get this feedback and help that drive the product. And if we're doing that sort of requirements gathering right up front, where I keep sort of drilling on this, but understanding the issue, when a customer comes to you, maybe they know a solution, right? We all know solutions. I would like a button on this page that does this. And what I want to ask is, whether it's the 5 whys or however you go about gathering the issue behind that or the requirements behind it, it's amazing how those issues start to line up across customers and across the market. Though I can compare issues to issues, right? And I can say that issue looks like this issue, and the solution probably solves all of those. So that's really breaking that down to the common denominator of the issue there, I think is an important skill from, say, a product owner or part of that agile team.
Great. Now, can you, we talked about this partnership. Can you share some, examples of kind of the partnership approach in practice, or kind of what some of the benefits are or the outcomes are?
Yeah, I think, probably the first one that comes to mind is a few years ago, we brought our private fleet module into the TMS. And this was something that, we said, okay, we know what a private fleet needs, or we think we know, and what kind of functions and features they would like. And what we did is we reached out to some of our customers on the network and said, we know you have a private fleet. You have a large private fleet, your 500-600 trucks in your fleet, to someone who has 40 trucks in their fleet, because they ended up being quite different use cases. We reached out to those folks, and because we had those partnerships there to be able to do that, we could say, hey, can I come sit with your dispatcher for 2 days and understand how, we sat with customers and saw how they used a whiteboard to track all their trucks. And you're like, we might be able to do that in software. Let me show you something. Give me 2 weeks. Let me show you this. And, we came back and said, oh yeah, but it's missing this. And that's another story, right? How you develop it. But having that partnership up front to be able to get in the door and say, sure, because you've delivered in the past and you've had this open, honest conversation with me about where you're going with things. But if we're in the fleet module, we come back and we deliver one piece of that fleet that we think is your biggest, pain, whatever that is. And it's maybe, planning your fleet, optimizing it. Well, we have an optimization model. Let's get drivers and trucks in there and show you that. And we had that customer come on site, show them what we had, and they gave us feedback right away. And we were able to pivot on that, without losing too much time or effort there, right, over 2 weeks, and get this right and solve a pain for them, like right out of the gate within the first month or so. And Agile says, right, too, like I could put that software out to production. It's fully qualified software at that point. So that partnership showed us how we could really engage at this Agile software development level. But having that partnership to get in the door and the opportunities to learn from those customers and a proven track record of responding and showing, results from our engagements was key to that. And that was not just 1 or 2 customers, it's half a dozen customers where we're seeing across fleet sizes, and what their pains are from a driver's perspective. And we could talk to drivers. That's not possible if you don't have these engaging partnerships from the very start in the sales process.
Right. And I think what strikes me is ultimately it's a win-win, right? It's a win for the customer because they're able to provide their input and they're able to get the capabilities and the functionality they want, and it's a win for you guys because I think you mentioned this earlier. You think you might know what the customer wants, but you might be surprised by these conversations, right? So it prevents you from going down the wrong path and developing something that's not aligned with the needs of your customers and the market. So I think ultimately if it's working right, it becomes a win-win for both parties.
Right. And I think that's the definition of a partnership, right?
Yeah, exactly. If it's a true partnership, everything you do ultimately turns into a win-win. Well, Josh, we're running short on time here, so I'm just going to go right to my last question here. I mean, as a way to wrap up, I mean, if a company is sending a different type of RFP, right, a request for partnership instead of a request for proposal, I mean, what should they include in it? I mean, what are some of the capabilities or attributes, that they should look for in a prospective partner?
Yeah, first of all, I love this idea. When I first saw it, it's the first I had seen of it, and when I read it, I'm like, man, that's fantastic. I want to do this.
Credit goes to not me. Credit goes to Kate Fantastic, because when I read that too, I loved it too. So I've been sharing it as much as I can. So
yeah, I need to touch on that. But I think first of all, I would make it an essay format. I would make it, we've talked here today a little bit about a partnership being a friendship. And there's a lot of sort of things that are common in between those two. And those are things that are best explained through discussions and not yes or no questions or drop down choices in an RFP. So I think that first of all, it's an essay format, and it's, give me plenty of room to explain what a partnership means to me. And I think if I took away the biggest thing about understanding a partnership, I think is really the strategic alignment between the two customers. And I think I would ask those providers, like, how do you align strategically with your customers over the long term? Because I think that's really at the core of this. How are we establish a long-term relationship? And how do you do that? What are those points? And how do they align with the values and the vision of our company? And I think those are qualities that you need to look for in your provider. But I think ultimately, in the middle of all that is the strategic alignment between the two customers, understanding how that provider does that.
Yeah, and I see this both, whether it's from the technology side of things or even a logistics service provider. One of the things that I hear a lot of with those successful partnerships has been there's an alignment of culture, right? Yeah. So there's that people aspect of it, right? We both have a culture where we are, whether it's an innovative culture, a continuous improvement culture, whether it might be Lean or Six Sigma based on that, yep. Our culture where we're, again, at the end of the day, our people speak the same language. We all are marching kind of to the same beat. And I think that's where, that's another foundational aspect of really, creating an environment that's going to be successful, for creating those win-win, partnerships. Well, Josh, we're out of time, but again, as always, I want to thank you for, making time to be on the program. I always say we always just manage to scratch the surface on these topics, but I think this is a very timely and important topic, and I think you shared some great food for thought and advice. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Adrian. Appreciate it.
I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you are watching this episode on demand, either at the BluJay Solutions website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or comment for Josh, you can post it there. I'm sure he'll be, more than happy to respond via that medium. So again, thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.